Although it's not quite terrestrial season yet here in the Midwest, no time like the present to turn around and get prepared for it. This is a Chernobyl ant. I'm going to do a video on tying this fly today. It's a fantastic terrestrial pattern. If you are in trout waters, it's great by itself, as well as a hopper-dropper combination. It floats really, really well. It's easy to tie. You can get a bunch of these done in different colors, different patterns for different fishing circumstances. In the warm water circles, all through July, August, and September, this fly produces very, very well. Has a great silhouette, nice little action on the surface, and again, very, very easy to tie. So that's the Chernobyl ant. I'll go ahead and get started tying. Start my Chernobyl ant by placing my hook in the vise. I'm using a Mustad R74. This is a 4X long streamer hook. You could use a R75 if you want, which is 5X long, or a 73, which is a 2X long. Now the older Mustad numbers for that is a 9672. I have seen the Chernobyl ant tied in a 2X long, 3X long, 4X long, and a 5X long. So it's up to you. It's not written in stone anywhere what you have to use. That's what I'm using. I like these to a little bit longer body. I'm going to go ahead and debarb the hook. This is a size 6, by the way. I'm going to, for thread, I'm using a Wapsi UTC 140 Denier in a brown. I'm going to attach my thread about an eye length behind the eye of the hook. And then I'm going to run my thread down the length of the shank of the hook and then back up again. This is going to give me a little bit of an underbody for the first bit of foam to adhere to. You'll see in just a moment. Now, a lot of people will, rather than do it this way, will even tie in some micro chenille, and that gives them a little bit better of an underbody. It also gives them a little bit more bulk to it. You could put some dubbing underneath if you want. It's up to you. I'm going to stop with my thread a good eye length behind the eye of the hook. You also noticed on the way back up, I didn't do touching turns. As I came back up, I did that in a little bit more of an open spiral. That's simply because it gives me a little bit more surface area for gluing the foam down to. You'll understand in just a moment here. Now, as far as the body goes in the Chernobyl ant, it is 2 millimeter foam. I've got some brown and some orange that I'm using here. Popular colors are a tan underbody and a brown on the back, even a white underbody with black on the back. Part of that really depends on your fishing conditions. Understand when the fish are looking at this from underneath, they're mostly seeing a silhouette. They're not, depending on the lighting and how clear the water is and how deep it is that they're looking up through and so on and so forth, they may see some color, but generally it's going to be a silhouette and a shadow. So the color of your Chernobyl ant is more for you, the fisherman, to be able to see, as well as potentially matching some of the hoppers that may be falling on the water, some of the other terrestrials that may be falling on the water. It's up to you. I'm using a orange and brown. I'm also going to cut the bodies out on this. As you can see, this has a nice taper to it here on one end. I'm cutting the bodies out with this as a cutter from River Road Creations. There will be a link down in the description to these. But these just make it very, very easy to cut out a bunch of these. It has a nice square end to it here, and it's tapered on this end. You don't have to have that. If you don't have those cutters, you want to cut these so that they are about the width of the gap of the hook. You can have this flat here and this flat on this end. I like to make them about twice the shank of the hook. That's going to end up giving me about a quarter of the shank in front of, well, I should say behind the eye of the hook out and at the end of the body out. It's up to you. You can make them a little bit longer and then trim them back. And I'll touch on that a little bit more as we're getting the fly finished. But that's where my bodies are coming from. I just stamped these out with the cutters from River Road Creations. Now, in order to help this adhere down, and it simply just makes the fly not twist around the hook shank when you're fishing it, I'm going to put some CA glue. I'm using a Loctite here, super glue. This is a controlled gel. Just gives me a little bit more work time. You could use basically a Zap-A-Gap, or I think Wapsi has a fisherman's glue that works. It's all basically the same kind of CA glue. I'm going to put some on there using my bodkin. I'm going to spread that out just a little bit. Doesn't take much. Again, what I'm looking for here, I don't want so much that it oozes around the sides. What I'm looking for is just something that's going to anchor that down, so while you're fishing it, it won't rotate on the hook shank. I'm going to tie one end off right here where my thread's hanging. I'm going to hold that down and help it. And then I'm going to proceed down the body, and I'm going to try and divide this into 4 even segments. You don't have to do 4 if you don't want to. You could do 3. It's up to you. But this just gives the underbody some nice segmentation. You're going to work your way all the way down to the end of the body. Remember, you don't want to put one wrap around the foam and then pull real tight, because you can cut through the foam. As you can see, I get more or less some even segmentation here, and I have this wrapped around and glued down here, such that with that super glue, this isn't going to, as I'm fishing it, tend to want to rotate around the hook shank. So that's the first underbody. It's done. I take my section of brown, which is going to be the overbody or the top color, whatever you want to call it. A lot of dust on it. Just going to match that up. I'm going to get a couple of wraps in here and start to cinch that down. Again, you don't want to put 1 or 2 wraps and cinch it down, because you can very easily cut through that foam. Now I want to put my rubber legs on. For rubber legs on this, I'm just using some black medium round rubber legs for this. You could use some white, you could use silly legs, you could use some barred legs. It's really up to you. Again, keeping in mind the fish, when they're looking this way at this from underneath, they're seeing mostly a silhouette. So these legs that are going to stick out here are mostly, whatever the color is, they're mostly going to be a dark silhouette. Again, really, it depends. If the fish is real close, they swim right up to it and look at it, and it's real clear water and it's bright in the afternoon, they may see some color. You may want to put some banded legs in there for a little contrast. It's up to you. I'm going to cut these generally about twice the length of the overall body. That's a little longer than I need. Splitting these up. I'm going to tie these in right on top with 3 snug wraps, not super tight, just snug wraps right around the middle. That way I can slide these out to the outsides like this. I don't want to pull those too tight into that foam. If I do, what happens is it gets pulled in too tight, and these tend to come straight out from the body like this, as opposed to being splayed out. Now I'm going to put an indicator up here, and this is kind of optional. I don't think the original Chernobyl Ant had these on there, but over time it's become very popular, and I agree. I think that they're a great asset. Depending on your lighting situations, either early morning, late evening, cloudy, maybe even some rain, this can get a little bit hard to see in the water. So you can put a small bit of foam on here of a different color, a bright color. I'm using a yellow for the back one right here. I trim that about half the width of the body. And I'm going to tie that in so that I just have, not even 1/8 of an inch sticking out in the front. Get 3 wraps on there, trim that short so it's about the same length. And this gives me a visual hotspot for me. This is not for the fish. So you can make that whatever color you want. I think Tim Flagler has a video on tying the Chernobyl ant, which is just an interesting technique. It's a different way of doing it than I do it. Not that it's better or worse, but he actually uses some round dots that he punches out of the foam, which I think is kind of interesting. It gives it a little bit different look. But that's how I tie that hot spot in. I'm going to pull the legs back and the upper foam. Now I'm going to bring my thread from underneath around to each of those segments that I put in. And this helps me to advance my thread up to the front tie-in spot right here. I'm going to fold the foam over. Sometimes this foam, because of when it gets tied in back here, gets pulled back from the length of the orange foam. So I'll stretch that just a little bit so it more or less matches up to the front of the orange foam. I'll get 2 or 3 wraps in there, half a dozen, more or less slowly tightening that down, getting that tightened down to the hook shank. Now I repeat the same steps with the rubber legs and the little indicator. It's up to you how long you want the legs. When you trim these, I generally will use my index finger as kind of a ruler. The width of my index finger, it's up to you. You can have these a little longer, a little shorter. Again, that's up to you. So I'll tie in that spot in the front, and you'll notice that I used a different color when I tied that in. You can use the same color if you want, the yellow or even a chartreuse or something, but I use a different color simply because it gives me more options in different lighting situations. In some, say in late evening, the yellow is going to show up a little bit better, but in the afternoon in shade or something, the white might show up a little bit better. This depends on your fishing conditions. With the legs trimmed back, I'll fold the foam up front, back, bring my thread right up behind the eye of the hook, just making a little bit of a head there. And I will put a 4 or 5 turn whip finish right up behind the eye of the hook. I would encourage you to look at other videos out there on the internet in regards to the Chernobyl ant, because it is a popular pattern. There are lots of different videos, and there's different styles that people do with these. One of the things you can do if you want is you can trim the front here. Some people will trim the corners off the fronts here. I generally don't. This is good enough for me. Again, if you don't have the cutters, then at this point, I would maybe trim the corners off the back. You could trim the corners off the front. It's really up to you. You can make these a little bit longer out front here. There's a lot of different things that you can do with these, but this is just the basic Chernobyl Ant. I find it's a great pattern for fishing the terrestrial bite, as well as a hopper dropper kind of thing if you're wanting to fish a minnow imitation or something like that, or even a nymph if you're wanting to bounce a crawdad or something like that, or some nymphs and some trout waters or something like that. For head cement, I'm going to apply some head cement along the thread wraps right behind the eye of the hook, back at the back where I tied that in, on the sides of those wraps as well. You could, if you wanted to, try and apply some right down in between those indicators. I find that it just doesn't get down in there. This is going to be enough. A lot of this foam right here is all attached via that super glue under it, but this here and this here is just wrapped in, at least for the toothy critters like the panfish and bass that I fish for. They can start to shred that thread up pretty quick, so it just helps to reinforce it a little bit more. That is a basic Chernobyl Ant. Popular colors, like I said, are tan and black, white and black. I'm sorry, tan underbody, brown on top, orange. I've seen them yellow and brown, black and white, chartreuse and brown, even a white underbody chartreuse top. All black also works well if you've got a lot of crickets around you or something like that. But it's just a fun, simple pattern, floats really, really well. It's just a great terrestrial fly to have in your box. So that's a Chernobyl Ant, and thank you for watching today. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help Dressed Irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.